Hey everyone, and welcome back to the channel. I will review every episode from The Flash Season 1 and give a seasonal ranking at the end. From this ranking onwards, I've decided that I will review crossover episodes from the season, but I will only include the Flash episodes in the overall ranking. Now, let's get on with it.
I don't think that bolt of lightning struck you, Barry. I think it chose you.
Okay, this is such a solid introduction to the series. The strength of this episode is character setup and world building. Given that this is set in the same universe as Arrow, I think the particle accelerator explosion was a good plot device. It serves as an organic way to bring metahumans into the world while setting up the larger arc of the series. Tonally, this episode and the series as a whole feels a lot like the Sam Raimi Spider-Man movies. I wish we got more quirks like Barry illustrating his thought process as a forensic scientist. Tom Cavanaugh stood out to me here. Maybe it's because I have knowledge of what's to come, but he owned every scene he was in and bounced off Grant Gustin so well. The ties to the Weather Wizard was interesting, especially as it was his brother in the show, which opens up doors for future appearances by the comic character. The dialogue here is solid and actually sounds believable. I think the Green Arrow cameo was good and set up a nice thread for the Flash's character. It felt like they used Oliver Queen effectively without him overshadowing the plot, almost as an audience reassurance that it will be a solid and great show. The Villain of the Week plot is a little lost here, but I think that's fine given all the setup it does. Even the scenes of younger Barry serving as the origin is nicely balanced here and it does a good job. Solid episode, good start, 8 out of 10. This one was alright. I hope this one would be more Flash heavy compared to the last. There was a continuation of world building here. It almost felt like the second part to the pilot, as the Flash feels established here at the end as a presence and as a character. I also wasn't very invested in Multiplex as a rogue. He just felt very uninteresting and I found the actor to be quite bad as well. Yeah, last episode we had Weather Wizard's brother and he felt like more of a supervillain. Whereas Multiplex was a guy with a gun who could clone himself. The best part of this one was the inner conflict between Barry and Joe. It's clear Joe cares a lot for Barry and is worried about him, and this episode handled the dynamic well and with respect. And the cliffhanger carrying on the mystery of Harrison Wells is really good. Again, I know I have context, but he is so manipulative here, especially when talking to Joe. You don't notice it on first watch, but with context, there's so much to Tom Cavanaugh's performance. This was alright, a rather fair 7 out of 10. This one was decent, but it took a while to get going. It felt like nothing really happened for the first 15 minutes before shifting into overdrive. I like the Villain of the Week choice. Well, sort of. Kyle Nimbus, appropriately named Mist, or Victor Zsasz in the Gotham TV series, had an interesting origin. As we know, the particle accelerator explosion is the catalyst for all the metahumans in Central City. He was hit by the radius of the explosion as he was being executed, allowing him to become literally toxic. Which is interesting, even if him hunting down the people who judged his fate is a bit cliche. This is also the first time we see Ronnie, and I forgot just how good his chemistry with Caitlin is. I think this particular flashback does wonders to flesh out Caitlin and Cisco more, while also furthering the darker mystery of Harrison Wells. The scene between Henry and Joe is amazing. The dialogue is a bit weak, but the great acting carries it. I thought this happened much later on in the series, but hey, here we are, so. I also thought the reveal that Joe knows about Iris and Eddie's relationship was quite fun and better than them just telling him, even if it makes their interpersonal relationship a bit weird. Then again, Barry and Iris are like adopted siblings here, and well, we all know how that ends, so what do I know. Another 7 out of 10. This is a solid episode. We got our introduction to Leonard Snart, aka Captain Cold here, a more well-known villain in the Flash's rogue gallery. Brought to life so phenomenally by Wentworth Miller, to me he's such a perfect casting for the character. Now, something I like about this one is how well it highlights the Flash's early days in the suit. I know that's kind of a given, but he isn't fast enough to save someone. Snart manages to freeze someone to death, and the effect it has on Barry is really well done here. This is also the first hint at a crossover for the season as Felicity Smoke from Arrow comes and visits Barry. I think I prefer her here with Barry than how she is later on in Arrow, but then again I would say the same of Iris. Their worst traits just get exaggerated with time. This has felt like the most cohesive plot for an episode so far. Granted, there was no flashbacks to highlight origins, but everything here felt a lot more connected. Like how the inner conflict between Joe and Eddie tied into the Snart storyline. Cisco building the ice gun did great work for his character and definitely makes sense. Originally, they didn't know who gained the speed, so it was a protective measure. But I think something like this acting as a plot device in case Barry went rogue would be great too. The little tease at the end for Mick Rory aka Heatwave was excellent too. I really liked this one. 8.5 out of 10. So, here's the thing. I think an interesting concept is let down by boring characters. So, a very boringly written general, played by Clancy Brown, is trying to weaponize metahumans. There is so much potential here, but it just gets let down by how generic the characters are. They are just cookie-cut prototypes rather than anything interesting. Which is upsetting as they have Mr. Krabs here and he's literally being wasted. Speaking of boring, the rogue who's being hunted is boring too. Her DNA is fused with a bomb, so if you touch her, you explode. Which could be really interesting. They could have paired this with a partner or friend to illustrate the struggles, but no. The plot really doesn't go anywhere and she just gets killed. Yes, the Flash running her body away was decent CGI and a good challenge for the character this early into the tenure, but that's it. I did enjoy Wells' rivalry with the General. I found that quite amusing and fits his character here, especially considering who he actually is. I think they could have done something unique and interesting, but just didn't. Bar the ending of the Flash outrunning the bomb, I don't feel like a lot happened. So a 6.5 out of 10. Weakest of the season so far. Okay, this is really starting to feel like the Flash now. It feels like we're past pilot territory and the story arc is coming into full effect. So this villain of the week is interesting and was implemented well. So the Flash has both mental and physical blocks against this rogue. Toby Woodward, aka Gerda, is Barry's childhood bully who left a lot of scars. Surprise, surprise, he was affected by the particle accelerator and can turn himself into metal. It's clear that this is a real challenge for Barry as the sonic boom was used to great effect. And the scene with Barry smashing through the door is some great CGI. While on positives, Rick Cosnett is on top form as Eddie here, and I really liked his dynamic with Barry. On first watch, I didn't like Eddie very much, but I appreciate him a lot more now, and definitely think he's better written here than down the line. But Rick's acting in every scene is phenomenal. Okay, every scene with Joe and Wells was perfection. Tom Cavanaugh just delivers performance after performance. I think these scenes are doing a great job at moving the plot forward. I think Joe is a good audience substitute in his suspicions of Wells, which is completely fair. The end scene is incredible and so accurate to the Reverse Flash's character. Wells convinced Joe he played no role, but Eobard is so petty and narcissistic that he felt the need to scare and threaten his daughter anyway. 8.5 out of 10. Excellent episode. Right from the bat, I will give this episode credit. I think it's quite ambitious attempting to have 2 villains of the week instead of the norm. I also think having the primary cast be split in half and each deal with one was the right way about doing it. First of all, CCPD, Joe, Eddie and Iris have to deal with William Tachman, aka Clock King. First appearing in Arrow, I think Robert Nepper gives a great performance and alluded to the sense of time perfectly. And as a side note, this is one of the first crossovers with Arrow, which is a fun prelude for the next episode. Back at Star Labs, Barry has a wobble and thinks he's lost his powers, while Farouk Gibran, aka Blackout, tries to hunt down Wells. Also, Barry's bully Tony dies protecting Barry and the team, which is so stupid considering he was evil last episode, but you know. I mock that bit, but for the most part, I do like this episode. I think the way this event goes does challenge Dr. Wells' morality in a good way. Or, more accurately, how he wants the team to perceive it, and that was great to watch. His dynamic with Barry was good. I think Barry lashing out and challenging Dr. Wells was needed here. There's something so damn fun about Hi Eddie, and honestly, I laughed quite a bit.
I love ice cream.
I think a 7 out of 10 seems fair for this one. I have been so looking forward to rewatching this one, and it definitely delivers. So, this is the first official crossover of the shows. Oliver and Co. head to Central City to have Team Flash analyze a metallic boomerang, which leads to the overall plot of the Flash and Green Arrow taking down Rainbow Raider. Okay, Rainbow Raider isn't much of a villain of the week, as he barely appears in the episode. He's much more of a plot device, but that's fine. The selling point here is Barry and Oliver, so in that regard, it excels. I like how this episode depicts Barry and Oliver's relationship. This early on, they barely know each other and are incredibly different, as are their shows. Arrow is much grittier and grounded in reality compared to The Flash, but the cast and characters mesh a lot better than you would expect them to. I think a lot of this comes down to Stephen Amell and Grant Gustin's natural chemistry together. Despite being a crossover, this episode pushes several plot threads forward. Due to Barry's outburst after being manipulated by Rainbow Raider, the CCPD approve Eddie's anti-Flash task force, and Iris now doubts the Flash's morality too. Oliver sees right through Dr. Wells and doesn't trust him, which completely fits the Green Arrow's character and is a nice touch. The fight between Barry and Oliver is amazing and is definitely one of my favourite action scenes. It's so clear how much work and effort went into it. The choreography and CGI elements work together so well, and I appreciate the two final scenes and the setup. We have the allusion to Oliver's child who will come into play later, and the reveal that Ronnie is still alive. Great watch, 9 out of 10 for this one. So here we have it, the second part of the crossover. Unlike the Flash episode, this one focuses a lot heavier on the plot opposed to character interaction and development. Team Flash come to give the Green Arrow a hand in hunting down Captain Boomerang, in this case the Digger Harkness version. I feel like the 5 separate bombs motif was a good way to utilise the Flash and the rest of the characters, as it would be way too easy for the Flash to just take down one of Arrow's rogues. Given it's his show and a threat to someone in his life, it was the right and organic way to sideline Barry. The episode seemed to push the point that the two series are very different tonally and a lot more than the Flash-centric part did. But the way they did it was clever and helped develop Team Flash a lot more. I like their acceptance of the gritty reality and how much tougher it is for Team Arrow to be dealing with actual humans instead of meta-humans. Even the team members seemed to connect in a big way. I think Cisco and Roy in particular were an interesting pairing and seemed to bounce off each other well. A lot more so than I was expecting them to. Just like the previous, I loved the chemistry between Barry and Oliver. Captain Boomerang seemed like an intense enough foe to justify being part of the crossover, and it was fun to watch. This is another solid episode. Christmas has come early in this mid-season finale. So in terms of Barry as a character, he finally confesses his feelings to Iris. I thought this was happening a lot later in the season, but apparently not. It did fit into the story well, as Eddie suspects Barry's feelings, and the present he got Iris is bordering more on a romantic side, which helps it all connect up well. We get our first full appearance of the Reverse Flash, and his fight with Barry is amazing. Baiting Barry in fits Eobard's character super well, and I appreciate how well the interaction was done. As far as the fight goes, more than anything, it signifies how much faster the Reverse Flash is at this point in the series. So his goal was to steal a tachyon particle accelerator, and doing so gets trapped at Star Labs, which all falls into Eobard's plan. By attacking Wells, it's his way of trying to separate Wells from himself to show that they're different people. Part of me wishes the audience didn't already know, as I think it would have made for a great reveal. Despite this though, I think Cisco's reveal at the end that there were 2 sets of lightning the night Nora was killed was a good piece of plot setup for the rest of the series. The scenes where Caitlin and Cisco encounter Ronnie was great. The emotional weight to the scenes were presented excellently, and the dialogue from Danielle Panabaker was perfect. Another great episode and deserving of a 9 out of 10. This episode was a slow burner, no pun intended. So I'm in two minds, as I think the second half was really good, but not a lot happened at the beginning. So we have the return of Captain Cold, this time accompanied by Heatwave, and I think their dynamic is very good. The casting choices is definitely paralleling the series Prison Break, as both Miller and Purcell appear as the leads. To be fair, the pair of them together feel like formidable opponents for the Flash. I enjoyed the links Cisco and Wells had to the CCPD, and it feels like it's setting up future collaborations. Which is good. It seems like a natural place to take the story and worked effectively. The fight scenes between the Rogues and Barry was fun, but I think the highlight was Eddie protecting the Flash. Given the recent history the pair have and the task force, it seemed like a good character moment for Eddie. Honestly, I'd forgotten the world didn't know the Flash yet. I thought thanks to Iris's blog everyone just knew and accepted it, but apparently not. Everyone now knows, and it seemed like a fun way to do it with these Rogues. I really enjoyed Dominic Purcell's portrayal of Mick Rory/Heatwave. I think his unstable nature and brooding personality is a nice contrast to Captain Cold. It made them feel distinct, which is very much needed. The beginning was weak, but the back half made up for it, so 7.5 out of 10. Alright, so once again, I think this one was quite slow. On the one hand, I think it had some great character moments. The reveal from Wells to Cisco and Caitlin was good. I think it shows growth of their characters in a good way. Wells is great in this one. His manipulation of the city is really good, and all ties to the Pied Piper were fun. This is a strong introduction for Hartley, but I would argue more as a character than through plot. I think he's a good risk at unravelling everything the Reverse Flash is planning. I also think there's a complexity to him which gets explored from here on out. He's talented, but got shut out by his family and mentors, so you can understand his anger. I think Iris's job is a good step forward, and her employer's only interest being a connection to the Flash is good conflict for her character. Part of me wishes she at least stayed in uni for the whole season, as it feels a bit rushed, but I like that they're doing something significant with her character other than being Barry's love interest. I liked the final conflict at the end. It felt more like an attempt to save people opposed to a bombastic fight, which feels similar to the Spider-Man trilogy, as mentioned earlier on in this video. I also really appreciate the tachyon device, and the reveal that the Reverse Flash is having difficulties with his speed. I think it was a nice touch to the episode and a good cliffhanger. This was just okay. 7 out of 10 for this one. I think fun filler is probably the best way to describe this one. So the villain of the week this time is Shauna Bays, also known as Peekaboo in the comics. A rogue who has the ability to teleport to something she can see in front of her. I like that she used her powers to aid her boyfriend break out of prison. Had the plot carried out the original idea of them paying off a mobster and getting out, I think it would have worked. If they had that mobster Marcus be the real villain, then it could have been a more interesting episode, but this idea gets lost. I kind of love the confrontation between Cisco and Hartley. It was so unnecessary and over the top. An argument is fine, but they full on fight each other outside Star Labs, and much like most of the action sequences, you can tell effort went into it. All of the scenes between Barry and Henry were excellent. I think it's one of the best relationship dynamics in the show, and this episode really gave Henry a good spotlight. I think Henry expressing how he doesn't get to feel useful anymore was great, and the stabbing shows the lengths he will go to for Barry. I think their bond is pushed further by the fact Henry was able to figure out that Barry is the Flash all on his own. Speaking of great dynamics, Caitlin and Barry's relationship grew. I know a lot of people use this episode to argue the romance between them, but I would argue this episode highlights a solid friendship more than anything else, especially as aspects of the bar scene was cringy to watch. I don't remember Linda being a character, but it's a nice continuation of Barry confessing his feelings for Iris at Christmas. I'm looking forward to seeing more of her dynamic with Barry grow. The ending to the episode was also fun. We got our first look at Gorilla Grodd, who is one of the more interesting recurring villains on the show. I think all these plot threads are interesting and work on their own, but together it confuses the story and doesn't work as a cohesive episode, so I will have to give it a 6.5 as a result. This was pretty decent. Okay, this episode is very character driven and is a good introduction to Professor Stein. So during the particle accelerator storm, Ronnie Raymond and Professor Stein fuse together, taking the strongest attribute of each, Stein's brain and Ronnie's body. I think this episode is great for Caitlin too. I think her dealing with Ronnie not being Ronnie at the moment was very good, and the final scene of the episode between the two is very solid as well. I like the dynamic between Barry and Stein. I think their conversation is fun and highlights Stein's character well. The secondary plot to this one is Joe and Cisco investigating Barry's childhood home. The blood behind the wallpaper is a good plot device and setup for the finale. I really like Cisco's reaction to Joe's suspicions of Wells. It would make sense for him to defend his mentor like that. The reveal of an adult Barry being at the scene is great as well. Barry's budding romance with Linda is interesting. I think they're a better match than he is with Iris, but most characters are, in my opinion. I think parts of this are pushed too far here. The chilly scene was fun and seems very in character for Barry, but him being thirsty whilst Wells and Caitlin are on stakeout is a bit cringe. The cliffhanger being a literal explosion was solid, and I think a character as prominent to the Arrowverse as Firestorm deserves it. I think 7.5 out of 10 is fair enough for this one. So this is the continuation of the Firestorm two-parter. I think all of the lore behind the character and his integration into the show was good. I like how this episode explored each of them separately, but had the underlying link tying them together as one entity. I especially like how this episode subtly builds up their tie together, and how they used this motif was interesting, especially when they both had a unique way of communicating a message to one another. I think the plot is let down by the army general. I think the US government being interested in the Firestorm project is good, and works as an interference, but the general as a character is so bland, which is surprising as Clancy Brown is great. How are they doing so little with this popular crustacean from a kids show? Barry's personal journey across this episode is good. I think his response to the whole timeline reveal was good, and his scene with Professor Stein discussing theories was excellently done. I think this allusion to time travel does wonders for the overall plot, and is a good way of easing the audience into this side of the Flash's lore. Iris investigating people at Star Labs seems a bit off to me. I would have thought her personal connection to Barry would have been enough to put her off the idea, but at least they're doing something interesting with her character. I think a 7 out of 10 is a fair score here. Wow, okay, so a lot happens here. We have the real weather wizard pop up, this time Mark Marden. He is looking to avenge his brother, who Joe killed protecting the Flash back in the first episode. I like this as a plot point. I think it's more interesting having him focus his attack on someone like Joe opposed to the Flash, and the attack on the Central City Police Department was a very dramatic scene and done well. This episode pushes other plot points forward as Cisco starts connecting the dots and learns some truth about Wells, aka Eobard Thawne, who reveals his true identity to the audience, which was fun. This scene is one of my favourites in the whole show, and Cisco's fear just brings everything together. Carlos Valdez and Tom Cavanaugh deliver top-notch performances. The death is a huge shocker. So this episode revolves around time travel as the Flash sees another version of himself whilst he's heading to another scene. I think the episode just about gets away with resetting Cisco's death, but if plot points like this became a reoccurrence, it wouldn't. Whilst we're on the subject of shock, Iris reveals her feelings for Barry and learns of his identity as the Flash. I'm glad this gets reset too, as I'm not a huge fan of them together, so I like that they aren't currently. I also feel like the writers have to be more creative about Iris knowing of his identity. Yes, there is a lot of shock value points here, but I think the plot and acting is so good that it all works together excellently. Best of the season so far, a very deserving 9.5 out of 10 for this great episode. Here it is, our next Rogue episode. Okay, in typical Rogue fashion to this point, we have another member join Snart's team. This time his sister Lisa, aka Golden Glider, who much like Snart and Rory has possession of a gun. This one turns people into solid gold, which is an interesting choice. I figured she would be the focal point of the episode, but she was just a tool to kidnap Cisco. Now, I really like Leonard in this one and what he's scheming. I think blackmailing Cisco using his newly introduced brother was a strong and darker plot point and mirrors the use of siblings across the plot. Snart learning of the Flash's identity is good, and I like the sort of stalemate the pair of them arrive at by the end of the episode. It's great character work for him and Barry. The scenes between Barry and Iris were very cringe to watch. How Barry is acting is kind of creepy. I get the point they were going for, it just was not fun to watch. At least not for the intended reason. I think Eddie was right to confront Barry, and the punch was unexpected and entertaining as well. I think the introduction of Cisco's brother adds a lot of depth to his character. The pair having to work together was a good piece of plot development for him as a character. It illustrates his loyalty to the Flash as well, especially considering how dire the situation is. Barry telling Joe he thinks Wells is bad is a good cliffhanger. 8.5 for this one. It was solid. This was such an interesting episode. We have the Trickster and ties to the 90s Flash TV series as Mark Hamill returns and does an incredible job. So this episode features what would appear to be a fake Trickster, wrecking the real Trickster's tenure of terror. But in actuality, it's his son, who he has been manipulating to terrorize the city and break him out of prison. The plot is quite convoluted, but still I think it kind of works and evokes itself well. The episode has the largest subplot in my opinion, as it gives a somewhat origin to the Reverse Flash, and fills in Eobard's time between murdering Nora Allen and launching the particle accelerator. We also get our first look at fan favourite Matt Letcher take on the character as he steals Wells' body. The whole build-up is exciting, and I think it delivers. Barry's suspicions of Wells is good, and it really feels like the story is coming to a showdown soon, in a good way. Which ties into another key moment of this episode, and that's Eddie learning that Barry is the Flash. Joe and Barry believe they need Eddie's support in order to keep Iris safe and bring down Wells. I respect the writers for doing this, rather than Eddie finding out by accident or something. I also really liked the bomb motif and how it was implemented to teach Barry how to phase. It seemed like a great way to remove the bomb and have Wells unintentionally reveal parts of himself. As Barry stated, the way he was talking about it was like he experienced it, as though he was the Reverse Flash. There is so much to like here. 9 out of 10 for this one. So, this one feels like a more character-focused affair. Felicity returns from Arrow and brings Ray Palmer, aka the Atom, with her as they need some help with his Atom suit. So, it makes sense for them to turn to Cisco and Caitlin for help. He and Cisco work together on improving the suit, and the two of them actually bounce off each other quite well. Felicity was a good choice of character for Barry to open up to about his feelings towards Wells. The scenes the two shared was solid and highlighted their similarities. The villain of the week was a bit meh, to be honest. Brie Larvin, a scientist who has an army of robotic bees, pretty much just seeks revenge on the people she feels betrayed her, when in actuality she's just a bit crazy and wants to hurt people. The best thing to come from a character was how the villain of the week plot mirrors the betrayal Barry feels from Wells. The episode did a lot of character work for Eddie, and I'm really starting to feel for his character. He is struggling to keep Barry's secret identity from Iris, who at this point believes he is cheating or keeping something from her. It's clearly taking so much willpower from Eddie's point of view not to just blurt it out to her, especially as their plot is left with an ultimatum. I'm not a big fan of how Iris is treating him, as I think she's a bit high maintenance at times, but I do appreciate how it would be annoying to be in that position. The end scene of Barry confronting Cisco and Caitlin about his suspicions of Wells was solid. Everything is coming together now. I found a lot of this plot bland, so I'll have to give it a 6.5 out of 10. I really enjoyed this episode. So, the villain of the week was interesting. I usually find shapeshifting powers to be really cliche and boring, but I like what they did here. I think the best thing that could have been done was to frame Eddie the way the plot did. I like how it put into question Eddie's alignment with some characters. It seemed like an appropriate and solid way to bring him and Iris back together. I think his semi-truth of working with the Flash was the best way to deal with the secrecy plot too. I was less impressed with the rogue shapeshifting into Barry. It seemed like the safe option. The kiss with Caitlin seemed a bit forced. I think it would have been more interesting if any other character worked it out. The cringe kiss wasn't the best thing, but I think the Eddie plot redeems it to some degree. I think the real highlight of the episode was the interactions and dynamics between Joe and Quentin. Given that these two have the same role and are the same character archetypes, I thought it would be too much of the same, but I think their personalities contrast each other well, the same way I think Barry and Oliver do. The discovery of Wells' deceased body was great. I think it would require some physical evidence to convince Caitlin that Wells is guilty, which they all believe now. Given the CSI nature of the Flash, I think this is better than if the Reverse Flash slipped up and revealed himself or something. This episode feels like the perfect gateway towards the finale. Everyone knows now, and Wells can no longer hide. It was done in a fun and character-driven way. I think this one deserves a 9 out of 10. It was such a fun time. This was such a fun episode. Okay, so they used deja vu in an interesting way here. Cisco keeps having bad dreams relating to the alternate reality where Wells kills him, which is where his own suspicions came from when Barry announced who Wells is. So, with a rudimentary version of his future vibe glasses, they're able to re-enter the dream and learn facts about Wells. I'm not usually one for exposition dumps, but this kind of worked well. The episode once again has flashbacks, this time to Barry in his coma before becoming the Flash. I think this is interesting for two reasons. First of all, illustrating Joe's distrust of Wells and how far back it goes, as he didn't like him from his very first interaction. Secondly, it's so intriguing seeing Eobard engage with Barry in this way. He could so easily kill Barry, but he puts his hatred aside for his own well-being and to torment Barry further. So, the trap was always going to fail. That's a given, but how they did it was solid. Wells making a metahuman who can shapeshift pretend to be him works and actually means the setup for the character was better than expected. The whole camera motif and heavily planning Wells did fit Eobard's character super well, and highlights to Team Flash how much of a threat this man really is. Eddie's proposal seems forced plot-wise. I knew it was coming, but it just felt like an excuse to once again push Barry and Iris. I don't enjoy will they or won't they, and it feels like this plot is bashing on Eddie too much. The ending reveal that Wells can't kill Eddie as he needs to preserve his timeline was a solid plot element. The relationship stuff weakened it in my views, so a 9 out of 10 for this one. It's still very good. Well, things have taken a turn here. First of all, Iris knows Barry's secret, and she isn't happy. To be fair, I can see it from both perspectives. It makes sense for Joe and Barry to want to keep Iris in the dark, so she's less likely to become a target to get at them. But someone as stubborn and strong-willed as her, I can see why it would be frustrating. Especially when she believes she could help, and in this case she did aid Barry in taking down Grodd. Okay, for the third time in this series, the army sergeant has appeared. Once again, he is so bland. I don't understand how they keep getting this guy so wrong. Look, the majority of this episode, he is being controlled by Grodd, so I will give his deadpan expressions credit. They were so unintentionally funny. It's still a waste of someone as great and as talented as Clancy Brown, but for the sheer comedy, I will call this one slightly better. I get this episode was just establishing Grodd, so what they did with him isn't going to be that interesting. And for the most part, the plot was bog standard and not special. I think the tragedy to Grodd here is how much he cares for Wells, despite the fact he only used him as a distraction. I think Grodd is better than that. I think a highlight for me was the interactions between Eddie and Eobard. They are connected by family history, but are so different in nature. Eobard is unnecessarily cruel to Eddie. He sees him as such an inferior member of his family, and the way he scorns him was so entertaining to watch. It's cold and cruel. Sums up Eobard phenomenally. And how wound up he gets by Eddie over literally nothing works so well too. It annoys him so much he has to prove that Eddie and Iris don't get married just to one-up him. It's not the strongest overall, so I'll give it a 7.5 out of 10. That seems fair. This is such a great penultimate episode of the series. So the particle accelerator is 36 hours away from relaunching, and Team Flash is scrambling to deal with the metahumans they have stored in the pipeline. Worried that the energy being emitted from the launch of the machine will kill them, so they decide the best course of action is to transport them to Olisnew. I really like this, as despite the horrible things they have done, Barry is still seeking out their best interests. In a desperate attempt to keep them safe during their travels, Barry recruits Leonard Snart for help. Barry crosses so many moral codes and gets Snart's entire record wiped in exchange. This is good, I think. It really shows the lengths Barry will go to when forced into a corner. It also feels very in character for Captain Cold to screw them over and come out on top. And the betrayal was done excellently in this episode. It was a lot of fun to witness. The episode finally ends Eddie and Iris' relationship, which is a shame as I do prefer her with Eddie, even though I don't think she treats him the best. The episode ends on such a fun fight scene. If you ever wanted to see the Green Arrow and Reverse Flash fight, then this is the one for you. The Flash recruits him and Firestorm to try to stop the Reverse Flash. I think this fight managed to include and highlight these three characters very well. At no point did anyone feel like they were overshadowing the others. This was so entertaining to watch, so I'll give it a 9 out of 10. Here it is, the finale to Season 1, and what an end it is. Okay, so Barry has the chance to go back in time and save Nora from being murdered. Vaughn baits him in with that revelation. I think it's interesting that Eobard wouldn't pursue him in the present or attempt to cause damage. So either he is lying to Team Flash, which is a big possibility, or he really had grown somewhat fond of them and just wants to be back in his own time. I think Henry's dislike of Barry's plan was really interesting. Despite being wrongfully incarcerated for 15 years, he doesn't believe it's the right thing for Barry to do, which feels like such a strong character moment for Henry, and gives an interesting perspective to their relationship moving forward. A future Barry stops him from saving Nora and propels Barry into realising how much he values his current life. I wish Barry arrived at this more organically, without this roadblock. However, denying Eobard what he wants was the right move. I would even argue Barry creates the Reverse Flash to some degree here with this action. Cisco receives an interesting revelation and his first real connection to his comic book counterpart, Vibe. Something that will be explored more going forward. This is due to the fact he can retain the memories of another timeline, of being murdered by Eobard. Eddie shoots himself. That's that, the reverse flash is stopped. I actually like this ending. We had seen Barry and Eobard fight across the series, but this act and all the build up to it makes sense for Eddie's character. He proves he is the best Fawn across the timeline and dies a hero, sacrificing his life so Barry, Iris and everyone can have a future, killing his future family tree and eradicating Eobard. The cliffhanger to the series is the particle accelerator spinning out of control and a black hole damaging Central City. Solid end and another 9.5 out of 10. Very deserved in my opinion. Before moving on to the rankings for the series, I wanted to talk about the season overall a bit. Okay, so I think like most introductory series, this one needed to strike a balance between world building, character introduction, lore and origin. For the most part, I think this delivered on those fronts, but I would argue it was a bit of a slow burner. It took a while to really get going, but when it did, the show was incredible. I think Barry's journey across the series was interesting. On the one hand, it helped deliver on his goal of getting the answers as to who really killed his mother back when he was a child, but it also meant delving into a darker and different world. In terms of the Flash, I think he learnt the basics of his powers, and this was done in an entertaining way, with a lot of unique rogues with varying abilities. I think the show did a good job of integrating people into Barry's life. Sure, Cisco and Caitlin kept Barry safe and helped him awake from his coma, so it would make sense for him to be grateful to them, but pushing it a step further and having these three become solid friends by the end was interesting. The emotional journey it took them both on was great. Caitlin having to deal with the loss and return of Ronnie, Cisco learning of his mentor's true identity and that he can retain memories of altered timelines and ones where he can die. The Reverse Flash's whole plan being the focal point of the series was also good. The comics haven't strayed from plot points where Eobard has raised Barry, so it's a fun adaptation here. It must have been so difficult for the pair of them, Eobard relying on the man he hates to get home, and Barry knowing he was created by the man who killed his mother. The way these two characters' plots were interweaved was excellent, and the way Wells was manipulating everything and everyone, well, apart from Joe, was very entertaining, especially with prior knowledge to who he is. Eddie and Iris's doomed relationship was interesting to watch. I'm actually a bit bummed it didn't work out. I don't like Barry and Iris as a pairing, and I like Eddie as a character. I at least wish he had another season or two, but his death was an interesting way to defeat the Reverse Flash and was satisfying given how much he bashed on him. Alright, so here we go. Here is the rankings for the series. On the whole, I really enjoyed rewatching this season. As expected, it was very difficult to rank them. I had a clear idea for top 3 episodes and the top 3 worst episodes. The rest was so difficult to place. Saying that, even the worst episodes of the season were still very enjoyable to watch, and nowhere near as bad as they get a couple of seasons down the line. So, what do you think of these episodes? Where would you rank them? Please let me know your thoughts in comments down below. If you enjoyed what you saw, then could you please hit that like button and subscribe? It will help my channel continue to grow. Stay close as I try to post new content as often as possible.